from the bottom of the ticket up, I say, because people always are interested in the great position. You know, of course, this is a presidential election year, and we're talking about the president, and we should be talking about who gets elected and how, and whether it's fair. But we have to pay attention to every single candidate, because if you don't, it's the candidates down the ticket that most impact on your daily life. And I was explaining that to someone, for example, who was not going to vote for city council. He's going to go and just vote on for the presidential part of the ticket, part of the ballot, and not bother with city council. I said, well, what happens if your streets need paving? That's who does that. That's who makes that happen. That's who sort of facilitates the rules that you live by every day. And then if those rules aren't fair, you know, it goes to the court. And of course, you have you have some interest in that, right? Because here you sit on the Supreme Court, which is the final arbiter, for the most part, of the disputes that happen in our state. That has to be terrifying sometimes.
It's stressful. I mean, when things come to us, they aren't black and white. So we literally make decisions that impact whether somebody's executed, that impact whether your insurance company pays off if you're injured, whether you get workers' comp, criminal cases. Everything you can think about comes to the Supreme Court. And so we have to be very thoughtful. We have to make decisions without regard to people or influence. And so it pains me that people pay such little attention to the 7 people that sit on that body.
I know. I have, in preparation for this, I went around to my neighbors and my friends in East Cleveland, and I asked them, can you name 3 people who serve on the Supreme Court of Ohio? They couldn't name one. And what that tells me is that people aren't paying attention to their own life.
That's right.
You know, the casualty is our democratic process, because we depend on every aspect of this very complex and kind of unwieldy thing we've created. We've created a representative democracy. That's pretty strange stuff.
That's right.
And every aspect has its job to do. You know, we know the president has a job to do. We know Congress has a job to do. We know the judicial system and the judiciary have their jobs to do, but we don't know what those jobs are. So you say it's not black and white. Well, most of us think it is. You know, he either shot her or he didn't, or he stole it or he didn't. And, you know, you get that instant answer, but you can't give instant answers.
No, because, you know, we have a Constitution, and the Constitution has principles that have to be abided by, and those are interpreted by trial court judges and appellate judges, and when there's not clarity in that, it comes up to us on the Supreme Court. So when individuals aren't interested in the Supreme Court, then you allow people who have vested interest to have greater sway than you. So whether that's the business community, whether that's the insurance community, whether that's trial lawyers, whomever it is, you as individuals say, well, my interests aren't as strong as others. And I think that's a fallacy, because what we do, you don't want to wait till the day you're standing in front of the judge and Pookie's got a case. Because then it's too late to make a decision about who you think is the best person to sit in that seat. You really have to pay attention on Election Day.
And so now you described the city you grew up in as being somewhat like East Cleveland. You know, East Cleveland's character is often defined as a very upper middle class city that fell on hard times and has a large minority population.
Oh, that's not Brittany Hills then.
And it fell on hard times, but that was a very long time ago. And its population, no one would say, has majority middle class people. It's mostly working class and poor people, and it's mostly African Americans. Although we have a Russian population in our community, we have other non-blacks in our community as well. But one would think that those are the people who would be most concerned, because I know as a lawyer, most of the people I see coming before judges are African Americans or other minorities, other racial minorities. And so it would seem to me that that would be a very important thing for us to focus on as a community. Who is that person or persons, in the case of the Supreme Court, who sits there and judges the validity of your claim, or the truth or innocence of the innocence or guilt, or the appropriate, as in the case of the Supreme Court. I guess you have to decide whether the earlier sentence or decision was appropriate based on constitutional issues.
Right, that's right.
Are there any other factors that come into play besides the Constitution, which seems to be very, very, a very big thing to use?
It is a very big thing, but it's also the law, you know. I think other thing people skip over is who represents them in the General Assembly. You know, people often want to complain about some of Ohio's laws. Well, those laws are written by legislators. The court interprets the law, and so if you're not happy with some of the laws that have been passed in recent years, you got to pay attention to who's representing you in the State House. People often talk to me about school funding. Why hasn't the Supreme Court done something about school funding? You issued the DeRolf decision 15 years ago, and school funding hasn't improved. Well, the reality is we are a court. We're not a self-acting body. We issue the decision, and then our work is done unless one of the parties files a motion in contempt or somebody else files a lawsuit. So there's no case or controversy in front of the Supreme Court for us to act on. There are, however, 130 members of the General Assembly that they are specifically responsible for making funding decisions about all funding of public institutions and state government. So if people aren't happy with the funding formula, the place to exercise that dissatisfaction is at the ballot box with the people who represent you in the General Assembly.
Now, are you telling me that the judges, with all your power, can't just go and say, look, we told you that this was unconstitutional. You're going to have to go and fix that and bring in your army and make it happen?
No, we are the Constitution. We are a court of limited jurisdiction, and a court as the third branch of government. We only respond when cases are filed.
And you don't have an army behind you.
We do not.
And you don't have a pocketbook to take money from the people.
No, we do not. It is the General Assembly who is responsible for determining what the school funding formula is going to be. And every governor since DeRolf has each come up with their own idea of what school funding should be.
Now, for those of us who are not attorneys, can you explain what DeRolf was?
DeRolf was a case, and he is now an adult, but he was a student out of a very poor district in Ohio who actually sued the state over inequities in the school funding formula. And over the course of years, the case made its way to the Ohio Supreme Court, and he won. The Ohio Supreme Court declared Ohio's over-reliance on property taxes in school funding to be unconstitutional.
So basically what it means is, if you got land, if you live on land and in a community where the land value is high enough so that your taxes are high, then your school gets flush with money.
Right.
And if you don't, then your school gets less money because so much of the money from the schools comes from the property tax.
That's right.
Now, which, you know, if you look at East Cleveland and compare it to an upper middle class city like Beechwood, they're similar in size. East Cleveland is about 3.5 miles square. Maybe Beechwood is a little bit larger, but not by much. And but the land value is so different that one school system spends almost 3 times as much as the other on its children. And my children have experienced both. So we know what that feels like. And it's a sad statement. But at the same time, there's nothing the court can do about it until the citizens do our job.
That's right. It is the responsibility of the General Assembly